Okay, folks, this is Joseph P. Farrell with yet another video blog, and I'm talking today about an article that someone had linked to me in an email, and I actually read this. It was pretty interesting. It's an article by Paul Joseph Watson over at Alex Jones's Infowars and PrisonPlanet.com. The article is entitled New Big Brother Satellite to Hunt Down Carbon Criminals, and I'll link this on the website when the blog is scheduled on the website, because this is really an interesting thing. The article is talking about the Astrium satellite, which will be monitoring carbon emissions in the effort of the elite to create a global government and monitor everyone's carbon footprint and tax you if you go over a certain threshold, which of course they're going to set very low so that they can tax very high. Now, the really interesting thing to me about this is really a couple of things that interest me about this. Number one is the implication here is, of course, to the elite's idea of sustainable development or sustainability. Basically, this is their idea that I've talked about all the way back in Babylon's Banksters, about how the financial elite always thinks in terms of a closed system. And this satellite bespeaks this idea of sustainability in a closed system to the T, because look at the philosophical implications of what we have here. We're sending up a satellite that is basically going to cost a lot of money to monitor the energy emissions based on carbon fuels, all right, carbon emissions. And this is such, to me, such typical elite, financial elite thinking, because these people truly live in a bottle. They live in a bottle where there is really no room for human progress technologically, and particularly in terms of technological progress in terms of energy supply. Now, what interests me here is the complete obsolescence that this satellite already represents, and the in the box, behind the times thinking of the elites promoting it. Because I'm sure most of you are aware by now that Andrea Rossi in Italy has reported some very unique success with his cold fusion process. This has been in the major media already. It's gaining some attention from sources that otherwise at one time tended to denigrate the whole idea of so-called cold fusion. And it's not just Rossi that we can talk about. We can go all the way back to the 1940s to Moray King. We can go back to Nikola Tesla even earlier than that, who were talking about very, very different understandings of energy than what we have today. And of course, cold fusion has been in the lead of these types of stories precisely because it was something observed. It is something that has been observed ever since its first announcement by Ponce and Fleischmann back in the 1980s. Now, what interests me here precisely with this satellite, therefore, is it represents a way of thinking about physics developments, about scientific developments, that could render this whole notion of sustainability, this whole notion of the satellite, completely obsolete almost before it's up there and deployed. The elite do not want to see, and I've argued this many, many times before, the elite do not want to see these new energies and technologies come online for two reasons. And I want to emphasize these reasons again here, because one of these reasons is oftentimes overlooked by people. The most obvious reason that people talk about all the time is that new energy technologies, such as Rossi is trying to develop in Italy, that Moray King was trying to develop earlier in the last century, and so on and so forth, these technologies spell an end to the closed bottle sustainability model that the elites have adopted over the course of the last century, particularly over the course of the last 2 decades. This closed system approach is the underpinning of basically their mercantilist financial monopoly, their energy monopoly. If that were challenged technologically, they lose their power. All right. But the other reason is, as I've always argued, an altruistic one. If we have energy technologies that allow us to tap into things like cold fusion. If you were to weaponize those technologies, you would have something that would, number one, be of major strategic consequence, of major geopolitical consequence, because it would represent a technology that you cannot easily track the proliferation and weaponization of. So they have been put in the position precisely by these types of scientific developments to guard against this possibility by trying to suppress their development. Because if we think we've got problems now within Iran or a North Korea or formerly Muammar Gaddafi in Libya trying to develop nuclear weapons, those kinds of things can easily be tracked in a certain sense because it requires certain technologies, it requires certain emissions to be detected, and so on and so forth. But these types of technologies wouldn't. They represent, therefore, in their military potential, they represent a real threat to the elite because proliferation at that point becomes a nightmare. But this satellite so represents the obsolescence of their thinking. It so represents the backwardness of their thinking because, unfortunately for these elites, human progress, human creativity simply cannot and will not be stifled by any mechanism that they might employ to do so. So they better get on the ball. Putting up this satellite is, as far as I'm concerned, a useless gesture because eventually these new energy technologies are going to be developed by somebody somewhere and they're going to be deployed, like it or not. And the elites are only cutting themselves out of the game by trying to pursue these types of solutions. So that's my thoughts on this Astrium satellite. Uh, this total total waste of time, but it is interesting that they're actually putting these things up now. They're planning on it so that they can send you a bill in the mail for having eaten too much Mexican food and caused too many carbon energy emissions. So anyway, that's it for today, folks. I'll see you on the flip side. Bye bye.